Hi, I'm Ross Purnell, editor and publisher of Fly Fisherman Magazine. Welcome to the Loop to Loop podcast, where we make deeper connections with the people behind the magazine. We are sponsored today by G. Loomis, American-made fly rods manufactured in Woodland, Washington. We are also sponsored by our good friends at Patagonia. They encourage you to reuse, repair, and recycle before considering a new purchase. If you enjoy this podcast, please support our sponsors, and you can support us by subscribing to the magazine at flyfisherman.com. You can also follow us on social media. Our Instagram handle is at flyfishermanmagazine. On Facebook, we are simply at flyfisherman, and you can watch this podcast in its video form on our YouTube channel. Just search for the terms Fly Fisherman Magazine. Our guest today is my longtime friend, Jay Nichols, who is the fly fishing editor at Stackpole Books and the publisher at Headwater Books. Jay has been influential over the last 2 decades at least in producing some of the most influential fly fishing literature of this century. He's also my most frequent fishing partner. When we get out in the rafts, Jay's the guy I always call on, not just to share the water, but I rely on him for all of my fishing information because he always has the finger on the pulse of things. Thanks for coming in today, Jay.
Yeah, you bet. And that's just around the corner here. Smallmouth is, with all this warm weather that we've been having, I feel like it can happen anytime now.
So close. Cabin fever is really taking over. We're for those listening on the podcast, we're recording this in March and April. We are getting the rafts blown up and getting ready to hit the water for smallmouth bass. So it's an exciting time for fly tying and getting everything ready to go.
For sure. We were just out the other day, and it is definitely still a little early, but the 60-degree weather has you chomping at the bit.
You've been out already?
Oh, yeah, a few times, It's...
Oh, hardcore.
Yeah, but we have those early black stones are hatching, and there were, fish up and rising. But I think, in terms of at least smallmouth bass, the water temperatures need to creep up a little bit more before we see any movement, at least from the big river. So.
Yeah, but the time change happened now. It seems like days are getting longer. Yeah. Like we're on the verge. I'm excited.
Yeah.
So the main purpose of our conversation today is talk about the incredible film that you have made and is not yet released, Lefty, the greatest of all time. Congratulations, by the way. That is an incredible tribute to one of the greatest fly fishers of all time.
Thanks, Ross. I really appreciate that. Especially coming from you. You knew him well, and actually, when working on it, all the people that knew him so well were sort of like my audience in a way, because I wanted to make sure to portray him in the most, the accurate light as possible. Everybody has a Lefty story, He has touched so many people so deeply. So it was a big project. I'm really grateful for all your support, for all fly fishermen's support. And it really was a fantastic experience, both connecting with new people that, Lefty had such a great influence on in the past, people like Flip Pallett or Heather Templeton, for instance, Sam Tallarico, people who I knew had connections with Lefty in the past, but I really didn't have much of a relationship with. And so in many ways, the project, in my opinion, really embodied the spirit of Lefty and bringing people together. It was a really a moving project for me to be part of.
Very authentic and beautiful. And like so many times I was like, that's Lefty. Like you really captured the essence of him. But before we get like deep into that whole process, how it came to be, I'd like to dig in a little more into your background so people can know more about you. You've been a big part of the fly fishing industry and fly fishing publishing for so long, but the idea behind this podcast is to get to know the people a little more. So let's go way back. Like, you have roots in Montana. Is that back far enough?
Yeah, I mean, sure, you can go back we can go back, I guess, to the beginning, but at least in terms of the fly fishing industry, like I began with you, like, when I met you in 2000. I'm horrible with dates, but I think it was 2000, right? I met you and went down to Fort Collins. I had no experience whatsoever in any sort of fly fishing industry type of thing. I was just a passionate but recreational fisherman. And I know that at that time you were full on involved in with the virtual fly shop back then, and you had already been a guide and everything. But for me, that was really the beginning of any sort of professional relationship in the fly fishing industry.
But even before that, how did you get into fly fishing? Like, growing up in Connecticut, like how'd you get started in fly fishing? Who got you started? Like, how did the fly fishing journey begin?
I was blessed because there was a lot of good fly fishing around where I lived. I grew up in a very small town called Falls Village, Connecticut. It's named after the Great Falls on the Housatonic River, and that river was within an easy bike ride for me. There was always trout fishing around, but mostly during those days we would fish for rock bass, sunfish, smallmouth bass in the river. And fishing was just always a part of like growing up. It was sort of an activity that you would do. You'd go fishing, or you'd throw a baseball around, or you'd play basketball. It's like, or just go fishing. It was just one of those things that we just did. You didn't really, everybody fished, it seemed. I didn't really get into the fly fishing component until a little bit later. My dad had always, as a part-time job, had always bought and sold fishing tackle. He always bought and sold antique guns, traps, memorabilia. So the basement of the house that we lived in was just sort of this like revolving sort of museum of fly fishing memorabilia. And my dad was not really a collector, so if the stuff came in, it would eventually need to get sold. But even when I was younger, would dabble a little bit with a fly rod, or even fish bait with a fly rod, or fish little spinners with a fly rod. It just the fly fishing stuff was always around. My dad was very encouraging in the sense that he was the first person to get me a nice rod, get me a nice reel. But he didn't really teach me to fish. He was I really owe a lot of that to all the books that were out, to those scientific angler series that came out.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, that was so mind-blowing, I mean, to see, guys like, Gary Borger or like Lonnie Waller, it just seemed like a completely different world. But Doug Swisher.
Oh, yeah. You and I learned to fish basically the same way. Like, that's how I learned. Gary Borger's VHS tape on how to fish the Bow River, and Lonnie Waller's Scientific Anglers videos and stuff like that. Those were big. VHS
They were like really important to me. And also, one thing that my dad did really well, again, he didn't really teach me anything about fishing, fly fishing per se, but he always had books. Originals, like, and that all those books that came out of the 70s, like Swisher and Richard's books, he would always just get me copies of those, and I, devoured that stuff. I mean, it was so important. You didn't have the internet.
Yeah.
So,
but it sounds like you almost grew up in a place that's like half library, half museum.
Yeah. And you add to that having many quality fisheries nearby. I think it often goes without saying, but I think that's an important, a critical, ingredient, is to have just good fishing. I mean, you know that as well as anybody, right? I mean, Did you grow up along the Bow, or were you?
I grew up in Calgary, so it wasn't like right on the Bow. It was pretty difficult to get to until I had a driver's license. So fishing for me basically started when I had a driver's license. I mean, I went occasionally before then, but it was pretty urban.
When you were younger, did you have a mentor or somebody that really kind of like taught you to fly cast and all that
No.
stuff?
No, if anyone, my mentor was Jacques Cousteau, the black and white movies. And I learned from VHS tapes, and my mother bought me a subscription to Fly Fisherman magazine. So I learned completely from books and media, and eventually just talking to Jim McLennan at the fly shop and just overhearing what they were saying and stuff. But that came later. Most of the fundamentals and stuff all came from books, magazines, VHS tapes.
And where you grew up, was there a very strong fly shop culture, or was that more of like a special trip, or were you one of those, you see?
Well, it's a big city. Before I was 16, I had to get my mom to drive me to the fly shop. So it's not like you could walk to it or anything. So it was a big deal to go to the fly shop. And yeah, Calgary was at the time had like 600,000 people, and there was one fly shop. Now it's over 1 million people, and there's at least 6 fly shops, I think. So yeah, it's a big fly fishing area. The Bow River's fly fishing, catch and release trout stream. So it's a good place to get started. It's just
I'd say
hard to get started if you're younger than 16, because it's a bit of a journey.
Yeah, where I grew up, we had fly shops. There was one down along the Housatonic that was pretty well known down along the catch and release area. But in general, I wasn't even exposed to that sort of that fly shop culture or anything. My first mentor was this guy, Chris Windrum, who still lives in the area in southern Massachusetts, and he had an ad out in the paper advertising fly tying lessons. So I gave him a call and I said, sure, I'll do it. But after a couple lessons, I'm like, hey, I can't really afford, this, but is there anything I can do? And he's like, well, you can tie these flies for me. And then I started, commercial fly tying for him. I think just starting with, I believe it was just Clouser minnows at first, but then he introduced me at my very first fly fishing show. It was in Marlborough, Mass. And he introduced me to a guy. His name is Al Nemec. And Al sold a lot of flies to shops in the East. And he gave me all the traditional Catskill dry flies to tie. Little did I know that he was just being cagey. He kept all the nymphs, and I would have to tie all the wood duck wing flies and everything. But
wow, I did not know that. Commercial fly tying at an early age.
And did that right through graduate school.
So you did grad school in Montana?
Yep, in Missoula. Yep, at the University of Montana. Ended up out there. I got my undergraduate at the University of Connecticut, and River Runs Through It had come out, a couple years earlier, and it's like everybody wanted to go to Missoula, Montana. It wasn't necessarily exactly where we were headed at the time. I went out there with a buddy of mine. We were just going to go to these different towns and see which one kind of, piqued our fancy, but landed in Missoula and kind of decided to stay there. After a couple of years of doing a lot of different odd jobs and stuff, realized I should probably go back to school.
How did you manage to pay attention to your studies with like Rock Creek and the Blackfoot and everything else that's around there? And there's a lot of fishing there.
There's a lot of good fishing. At the time, I was so busy working, to be honest with you, that, there's definitely a scenery tax when you live in a place like Missoula. There's a lot of extremely qualified people out there competing for, very few jobs. And so, I had to work 2 or 3 jobs at the time. Definitely was not like the trout bum, where I could fish every day. I had to work every day. So actually, and at the time I couldn't afford a boat. Didn't really know too much about fishing boats at all. And so we kind of just focused on a lot of like the wade fishing opportunities. And as you know, out there, it's light until 10 o'clock in the summertime. So you work all day and then you can still go and you can, fish for a couple hours, no problem. So.
The glory days.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So how did you get into the publishing business after you got your master's degree in, was it English literature?
Yeah. Well, I got lucky. In graduate school, I was taking a whole bunch of professional editing courses and went to work for Mountain Press. And then after Mountain Press is located in Missoula. And then after about a year, I got a job at Falcon Publishing in Helena, Montana. And Falcon was at the time a really big guidebook, publisher. And I was the hiking guidebook editor. And honestly, I thought I was going to be there, for as long as possible. I loved it. I loved that job. I loved Helena at the time. It was a very small city. But my editorial director there, his name is Glenn Law, L-A-W. And John Randolph called Glenn and asked Glenn if he wanted to be, if he could come and be an editor at Fly Fisherman Magazine, like a senior editor position. John Randolph, publisher, editor, longtime publisher and editor of Fly Fisherman, was looking to fill an editor position. And he asked Glenn, and Glenn said, well, the job's not right for me at the time, but I know this young guy who might be interested. And, John, John's just like, oh, come on out. Everything was a little unclear to me, a little vague, but maybe that was his way. But I you probably don't remember, but I flew out to Harrisburg, spent a weekend with John, met his wife, Mary. We drove around, we looked at Big Spring, and we looked at, he took me down to the Latorde, and he talked me through a lot of the Pennsylvania history. He gave me the tour,
The John Randolph tour.
Yep, it was great. But super intimidating. And I'm like, this is, I didn't know what to think. And then shortly after had me go to the fly fishing show, and spend a whole weekend rooming with him.
Really?
Yeah,
I did not hear that part.
Yeah, it was like the longest and most intimidating job interview I've ever had, like where you have to, room with your prospective boss.
That's a little personal.
But I'm joking. But so really, it was just it was luck, that I got involved, not in the publishing business because that was definitely a path that I wanted to pursue, being a book editor. But getting into the fly fishing business was, it was just luck. I was in the right place at the right time, and forever grateful for that opportunity.
And that's when you and I became coworkers and friends. And
definitely, that must have been 2000.
I moved here in 2001, so it's been over 20 years.
Yep.
That our friendship has spanned the lifetimes of dogs. Our dogs grew up and died, and
you have a good friend when you've known multiple dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, it really, I owe everything in my career to that. And all of the, it's like getting a, I don't want to sound cliche, but it's like, I was thinking about this on the way over here. It really is like, it was just like this advanced degree in fly fishing. You literally it's a good fire, but you're, I just remember thinking like how even you and I would, like on our lunch breaks, what we would do is we'd go out and we'd practice casting. It's like we did those fly swaps where it was just like all your colleagues are really into it, and you feed off of one another. And not that there's any competition. It seemed that there was actually zero competition, but it was just like that feeling of like camaraderie and just excitement. And, that's what I was thinking about when I was coming over here, of just like how into it we were.
And again, part of that is the people, like getting to meet all these people like Bob Klauser and Bob Popovics, and just like all of the people that were doing such new and exciting things at the time. Like it was off the hook.
Yeah, and that brings us to Lefty, because I remember like within the first week that I was at Fly Fisherman, I got a letter from Lefty, just, and that's like introducing himself. Like he doesn't really need to like introduce himself, but and saying, please come on down, when we can do lunch, and just like I said, within the first week. It's like and one of the great things about the Fly Fisherman is it's like you were like immediately like led into this club, and so you ask about the publishing career. After I was at Fly Fisherman for 5 or 6 years, had already made so many connections, and had started doing some work with Bob Clauser and John Barr back then, like helping them do their books through working with Stackpole. That it really was a seamless path to kind of start getting into the book publishing, and working with a lot of these authors that I had already worked with at the magazine.
So you've made so many amazing books. Like Stackpole has been the best publisher of fly fishing books for my whole lifetime, basically, at least 20 or 30 years. And you've been at the forefront in creating all those, like some of the masterpieces of like Pop Flies and recent stuff like the Game Changer books. And I guess while we're talking about books, casting with Lefty Kreh was kind of like, a big part of Lefty's life. Like the best cast, he said it's the best casting book he ever made. You took all the photography on that, and man, you guys must have spent days and weeks and months working on that book together.
Yeah.
Can you just dive into that book a little bit and tell us like about how that book was created?
Yeah, I can. I'm honestly not sure I'm not sure where the idea came from. Lefty wanted to do a new, like a modern casting book. Let me just back up. You're speaking about Stackpole. I should mention that one of the reasons that I've worked with Stackpole for so many years is that Judith Schnell, who's the publisher of Stackpole, back when Nick Lyons at Lyons Press and Lyons in Burford really dominated the fly fishing space in the books. Nick Lyons did an amazing job. A lot of Nick Lyons' books, though, were black and white books. They were large format, but they were black and white. What Judith really wanted to do was like make these big, beautiful books, not coffee table books, but definitely full color. We're really lucky in our sport everything is so photogenic about our sport, right? So it just goes hand in hand. We have so many beautiful opportunities for beautiful pictures and fish and scenic shots and all that stuff. So Judith really doubled down on these big, beautiful, books that are heavily illustrated, and that's what appealed to me. It wasn't like you were being skimpy. You could really show what you wanted to show, and so with casting with Lefty Kreh, Lefty's thinking, maybe we show 6 photographs or something for each one of the casts, and Judith was like, no, like make the book as big as you want it to be, just do whatever you want, and that was really exciting. I mean, to be able to just do everything that Lefty wanted to do and include all of the different casts that he wanted to include. So I think the idea of the book came from Lefty, but it wouldn't be this like giant, full color, lavish book if it wasn't for, I think, just Judith's, encouragement to do it like that. Basically, Lefty and I, Lefty wrote out an outline for all the different casts that he wanted to include, and we came up kind of with a plan. But what was the most interesting for me about that whole journey, it was a multi-year, project, was that we would meet down on the Gunpowder River in the mornings. Morning light was the best light, and just sit there and wait for the light to get right. And that was such a magical time for me. And I knew it was magical when it was happening, right? I mean, it was just this like, Lefty would share lots of stories. He would share a lot of like life things. He would share a lot of outdoor things. He would talk about the plants. He would talk about the trees, like a lot of stuff that, like very little fishing stuff, And so we would just sit and wait, and he would drink his coffee. He always had a giant Stanley thermos, and we'd share coffee and just wait for the light to get right. And for me, like when I look back at so many of those photographs in the book, that's always what I think of, is just sitting there some mornings we'd be in his van, or his Forerunner later on, and or just sitting on the bank. And really it was a magical time because Lefty really is an amazing outdoorsman. He knows so much. And the gunpowder was it's a very special place for him. So I really felt the weight and the importance of being able to get that quiet time alone with him, because so often when you're with Lefty and if there's other people around, everybody wants some of that,
Yeah.
So I felt very grateful to be able to have that time with him, to be able to work on that book.
That must have been amazing. I totally feel what you're saying, though. A lot of the time when I was around Lefty, there was a lot of other people around. He's getting pulled many different ways and stuff like that. It sounds pretty blissful to just like sit on a riverbank and quietly wait for the light to get perfect. It's a rare opportunity.
Yeah.
To get to know somebody like that.
Yeah. It was great, and of course, we tried to get started early because it was a popular fishing spot. So as soon as like 8:30, 9 o'clock rolled around, and you'd had people come in, Lefty couldn't help but say hi to somebody if they were saying hi to him. I mean, he just had that in his personality. He couldn't be rude or just say, hey, we're working here, and so we knew that time was over once people started to show up. But fortunately, most fly fishers are, they weren't there at 5:30 in the morning or 6 in the morning. But
and he's very recognizable. The trail's named after him, for Pete's sake, so I'm sure it's pretty hard to get anything done when people are coming by and they're like, oh, that's Lefty Kreh.
Yeah.
Let's say hello.
Yeah.
And also, it's hard to be sneaky when you have a photographer like you sitting there, you instantly know something's going on.
Yeah, well, everybody in that area, Lefty's probably, or I'm not sure about now, but traditionally was probably the most recognized angler. I mean, just by his overall shape, his laugh, his hat, right? I mean, he just, you could know it was him from a mile away, very iconic.
Yeah. How did Lefty help you in some of these other books? Like, one of the amazing things about Lefty is he had a network. Like, he was connected to almost everybody. And, his connections helped me at the magazine many times over again. He'd call me or send me a note or something and say, hey, you need to talk to so-and-so down in South Carolina who's tying these really great flies. And as soon as it had Lefty's stamp of approval on it, it was worth pursuing. That's how he sort of guided the content of the magazine, over the years. And I'm sure that happened to you the same way at Stackpole. Like, some of the books must have come from connections through Lefty.
Yeah. I always like, that book, The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about 3 different types of people. There's 3 different types of people that can actually make things happen in the world, like that can cause things to tip. And one of those character types, those are mavens, he calls them. Those are people who are like experts, right? And they're like super into like any advancements, and they're just on top of it. Those are the mavens. And then he talks about this category of people that are the salespeople. Like, they're just really good at basically selling stuff, like selling ideas or But the third category are what he calls connectors. And these are people that are not just good at putting people together, because that is definitely like an important part of it. But they're people who move between different social circles and move between different spheres. That's what really makes a connector. It's like they're moving all around these different places, and they're able to put people together. And I really think that that's Lefty, like, to a T, because not only was Lefty really good at putting people together, and not only did he personally derive a lot of pleasure out of putting people together, and he told me that time and time again. I mean, it's what he views as one of his greatest accomplishments in his life are the connections that he's been able to make. And that says a lot about Lefty, right? Mm-hmm. But he's able to move in between high and low, right? Like one day he might be, fishing like a beat, like in Norway or something on the Salmon River, the next day fishing for carp or whatever. Like he moves between groups, saltwater, freshwater, right? Like, and then he really takes pride in putting people together. And so Lefty, I can't tell you how many times Lefty has fed me an idea or made a suggestion, but it was never never heavy-handed from him. Always like it was always phrased like, I think you might enjoy meeting, so and so, right, or something like that. It was never like a heavy-handed thing, and really so many I can barely I couldn't count them. I'd have to sit down and think, but a funny one and a memorable one is with Blaine Chocolate. Lefty called me one day and said, I'd like for you to come down and have lunch with me. There's somebody I'd like you to meet. His name is Blaine. And I think he's a good person for you to know. That's all he said. And so he invited me down, and Blaine and his wife came, and we sat in Lefty's office for a while, kind of, and then we went out to eat. And, Lefty, that's all that Lefty did was just kind of like put us together. It was very subtle. And he said, Blaine is somebody who has a lot of experience. I think he would be good as a book author for you, someday. And that's just a perfect example. Like, he didn't need to do any of that. Like, he took a whole day of his time just to like host the two of us and almost play like matchmaker, I guess, in a very subtle way, right? And then what Lefty did, over the years when Blaine was not really getting the book done as fast as maybe Blaine should, Lefty would send Blaine notes from time to time or just check in like, hey, Blaine, how's that book coming? And so so I mean, Lefty, of course, he, and when I worked at Fly Fisherman, Lefty was one of our sort of like constant sources for, if not article ideas, because not every article works out, right? But always bringing new people by the office, doing things like that. I mean, he's just, that's one of the things, in my opinion, that makes Lefty such a magical person, is his ability to connect.
I think that is an incredible description of like just who he is. Like, that just fits like Lego pieces, and the different sort of ecosystems and everything too. I mean, he would have these billionaires just send their jet out to pick him up and fly him for a weekend just so they could have his casting instruction or fish with him, or they're just friends. He hung out with people who were like in a different economic strata all the time, even though he grew up poor and was as blue collar can get. But with fly fishing, none of that matters. Like, there's not different classes of people when you're in fly fishing. And that's one of the things Lefty helped me understand, is that it doesn't matter whether you're a billionaire or, you don't have two nickels to rub together, or, you're highly educated or not educated or whatever. If you have a common bond of fly fishing, you can make it happen. And that was Lefty. Like, he'd connect people from every economic sphere, every regional sphere. It was an amazing. Everyone was just another human being, and they'd get the same jokes and the same handshake and the same smile. He was very genuine that way. Everyone was the same to him. He didn't kiss up to certain classes at all. He treated everybody exactly the same.
Yeah, it was one of his superpowers, I think. The superpower to not be impressed by money. It's a superpower, because it's pretty easy to get swayed sometimes by a lot of that stuff. And I know he enjoyed it, for sure, like parts of the luxury, parts of it. And he enjoyed the fishing and all that, but he was never, ever swayed by it, really influenced by it. And he knows as well as you know, and that I know, money might separate people, but all that disappears as soon as you get on a boat with somebody. Like, it just disappears. Yeah. Like, and it, whether it's, I mean, that's all I'm going to say about that. Like, you take a fishing trip with somebody, or you spend the day on a boat with somebody, and then all sorts of like, there's just wealth is not what's important. At the end of the day, it's how
Amen.
you are on the boat, or like, are you the guy or gal who like breaks your rod because you're frustrated, or like has a tantrum, or can't deal with the weather, or can't cast or something? I mean, fly fishing, as much as in our sport, as much as our sport has wealthy origins, it really is a sort of a leveling force. I think you're right. It just doesn't matter.
It's incredible. Yeah. When you get on the boat together and Lefty makes the first cast, all of a sudden it's like, okay, this is the person who is the alpha wolf, sort of to speak, almost instantly. And we need to learn from him because he's obviously doing things that you can't do, no matter where you came from or how much money you've got in your wallet. Like, Lefty was the man.
Yeah, and in the movie, there's a couple sort of stories about how he kind of pulled out some of his tricks, his skills, to get people's attention. And it's something that I think it's really important. He, when he was coming up through the ranks as like an exhibitionist, like fly caster and stuff, he knew he had a lot of times to perform a little bit just to keep the crowd interested. And I think he kept that skill with him sometimes because throughout his career, especially early on before Lefty became Lefty, but especially having to deal with a lot of the people in Florida at the time when he moved south to manage the Met, it wasn't just like winning over the clubs. Like he has that famous story, which it didn't make it into the movie, of the first time that he went fishing with Ted Williams.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that. Can you tell that?
I'll try. I'll paraphrase, but anyway, Lefty was managing the Met tournament, and one day he gets a call. Lefty, this is Ted, and Lefty's like, Ted who? I don't know. And then Ted Williams, and Lefty's like, okay, I still don't know who you are. The baseball player. Oh, okay. And then Lefty says, I knew he was a baseball player, but I didn't know he was like the baseball player. And he's like, okay, and Ted's like, I want to take you fishing. Can you be down in Isle Morada, tomorrow at 6? And Lefty's like, no, I have to work. And Lefty's like, the next day that I can fish would be Saturday. And Ted Williams was like, fine. So they get down to the dock. Lefty meets him down there, and Ted Williams says, I'm paraphrasing, but let's sling some line, I think Ted Williams says to Lefty. and Ted Williams strips off a bunch of line and starts like casting it. And as Lefty describes it, just like working way too hard and just like really straining, but finally makes like an 80-foot cast, right? After about like 15 false casts. And Lefty's like, and then Ted Williams goes, what do you think of that? And and Lefty goes, well, it's okay, if you don't hurt yourself. And Lefty then picked the rod up, makes 1 or 2 false casts, he said, and then shot the entire line. And he said after Ted Williams saw him do that, he instantly just took his tone down, like 15 notches, and was deferential to him for the rest of his, for the rest of the time that they knew one another. It was just one example where, and I think Lefty had to do that a lot for a while, before, there's a lot of egos in fly fishing, especially in the Keys and everything. And I think Lefty had to deal with that before before people, knew who he was.
And Ted Williams is a professional athlete, and Lefty is really kind of a tiny guy. I mean, very unassuming physically.
Yeah. And it just, so Ted Williams, came across as super abrasive, kind of a jerk, but Lefty Lefty had to kind of put him in his place, but they did ultimately have, a long friendship, and it was just sort of, you were talking about like alpha male type stuff. It was just, just one, you just had to see Lefty cast, and it kind of put you in your place, Oh,
that is an awesome story.
It's just, yeah. I mean, I wasn't, like I said, Lefty, obviously, it's a story that Lefty tells, but I think he had to do that a lot for a while, and then, but then later on, his mantra was always like, you you don't want to, display your knowledge. You want to share your knowledge. And so I think he only pulled out little, casting feats like that if he felt like he needed to just either grab a crowd's attention or maybe because he did not like people who, had big egos. And
he wasn't trying to show off. He was just trying to show the person that they had something to learn. I think. That's what put them in a mood to like, okay, now I'm in a learning position.
Yeah, yeah, and that was what makes him a good teacher. Like he knew what to do. And he had all sorts of tricks. And I think, just being a teacher, he knew when to maybe put the pupil, in his or her place.
Yeah. When he's with a little kid or a beginner, he didn't have to do things like that, but he always could if he wanted to. Mm-hmm. So good chance to talk about the movie.
Yeah.
I think this is something that you've been working on it hard for a year, but really you've been working on it for years and years. When did you start filming what's basically the foundation of the film?
Back in 2000. So I had done a bunch of projects with Lefty. We always liked to have stuff cooking, and Lefty really liked that. Lefty liked to be busy. Back in 2017, his doctor told him, Dr. Mark Lamos, who was his longtime doctor, told him that he had to stop going to the shows, that they were just taking too much of a toll on him, and that he also needed to stop traveling. His schedule was crazy, before that. I mean, you look at one of Lefty's calendars, every day is blocked, it's just like blocked off. And but his doctor told him he needed to stay home. He could still write articles, he could still visit with people, but no more traveling. So, I started talking with him about something that we could do while he was at home. And I knew he had this incredible archive of photos that he had taken really since the 50s. And I had thought that something low pressure, easy for him we could do sort of a audio history of fly fishing. I would scan the pictures, and all Lefty would have to do is just talk about them, and I would record them. And then I thought that maybe someday we could have something online where you could hear Lefty's voice describing all these iconic images. And so that's kind of what we started doing in 2017 for, we spent maybe 4 or 5 recording sessions just doing that. And I was just recording audio for a while. And then I'm like, well, Lefty looks remarkably good. I was thinking for somebody who really was only given, a couple months to live, he would have days where you would have no idea about that at all. He looked so good. Color with full color in his face. His spirits were up, and I'm like, well, maybe we'll just run a camera. And Lefty really wanted to talk about everybody else other than Lefty. He really felt like fly fishing, that there were so many fly fishers that didn't get the recognition that they were due. Everybody from people like Ross Trimmer, for instance, who was part of the Charlie Fox, Vince Marinero gang. Lefty actually thought that Ross Trimmer was the better angler out of that little group. He wanted to talk about Ross Trimmer. He wanted to talk about Myron Gregory. He wanted to talk about Jim Green. He really felt like Jim Green never got the recognition that he was due. Wanted to talk about certain women like Sarah Gardner and people who really were disciples of his and very influential, but he felt like needed a little bit more attention. So that's what we did. So we had a lot of sessions where I would record him talking about all these different people. And slowly I was through that whole process, I'm trying to get him to talk more about himself. And we ultimately we probably have about 32 hours of footage right up until pretty much the last month before he passed away into 2018. And it's really just a mix of footage, him talking about his bio information, but also he really wanted to just talk about other people.
He's loved putting other people in the limelight. Again, Mr. Super Connector. He always wanted to shine a spotlight on other people right down to his last year.
Yep. And he hated to talk on himself. He really, it's just something that made him uncomfortable. He didn't really like it. He didn't think that his story was important. Wow. And he really just wanted to focus on other people. So we did all of that. I mean, I was grateful to be able to spend that time with him and, to help him. I would a lot of times answer the phone for him. Like people would call a lot of times. And so he'd like hand the phone to me if I have to like explain, he can't talk for very much longer. His daughter was there at the time. And, it was just, for me, it was an honor to be let into his home for that last like 8 months or so. And I really kind of felt like part of the family at that time. And it was nice just to be around him. And I guess it was as much for me as it was for him. I knew he liked it. I always checked in with him. I wanted to make sure that he was up to it. And I think he, Lefty, he liked to be busy. He liked to have, something to do and something to think about. So that's kind of like where it all sort of happened and where a lot of the footage was gathered. And then the project, just in a nutshell, basically sat dormant for a couple of years until you resurrected it. And for that, I'm forever grateful. And I think many, many people are going to be very appreciative that you wanted to resurrect the project and that Fly Fisherman got behind it. And, I'm really pleased with, and I think Lefty would be pleased with it as well.
I know he would.
Yeah.
That's the one big takeaway I had from the last time that I watched it, is that he would be proud, and it's an amazing representation of who he is and everything. I thought it's hard to say you crafted a story because it really was just genuinely his story, but you told it in a beautiful way, and I think people are going to be pretty impressed by it. Let's dive in a little bit more into, so that was the foundation of the film. And so when you and I decided to, turn this into a full production, there was other tasks. We needed to get footage of other people talking about Lefty because he was always reluctant to talk about himself. So you embarked on a year-long project to interview other people about Lefty and get a lot of the other faces of fly fishing on film. When we first talked about this, one of our goals was to, get all of Lefty's friends, interview them, and that would include Kathy Beck and Bob Popovics for sure. But, as things proceeded, they passed away and we were unable to get them. To me, that sort of added a sense of urgency to everything, like we need to get this done. Not only is Lefty gone, but now some of Lefty's friends are passing away. So it needs to be all documented. Like, this is an important part of fly fishing history. So can you talk a little bit about some of the people who you interviewed and made part of the film and allowed to, you made them part of the Lefty story, or they already were part of the Lefty story, but.
Yeah, just a couple things about that. First, so many people are part of Lefty's story, and I'll get to the interviewees, but Lefty, in many ways, when you talk to people, Lefty in many ways is like a cult leader. Like, he made everybody feel like they were the only person in the room, and that's exactly how like people describe religious figures and cult. It's like he had this power to, if you spent even 5 minutes with Lefty, people would call him like their mentor, right? Like, he just had this amazing ability to connect with people and make you feel important. So there were so many people that have been affected by Lefty and that have like really interesting stories to tell. I can think of 100 people probably just sit here and just list them, and there's way more than that. And a lot of Lefty's closest friends weren't really fly fishing celebrities. like a lot of Lefty's friends don't forget. I mean, Lefty moved in so many different worlds, in the hunting world and the knife making world. Like he had a lot of like outdoor friends too that weren't, fly fishing like luminaries. I think we had to make a choice about like how do we show a cross section maybe of the types of people to be able to kind of like flesh out a story. It's just like an editorial choice that you have to make, because in 44 minutes, you don't have enough time to include everything, right? So you have to make tough decisions, and the decisions were tough about who to include and who not to include. Not being able to include Kathy Beck, not being able to include Bob Popovics was really tough for me, because those are two people that were shaped enormously by Lefty. Lefty loved both of them dearly. But you're right, it's also triggering when you just think about how two untimely deaths, people who had many, many more years of life and productivity and stuff to give, it's extremely sad. So of course all that's churning around in your brain, and it did kind of give the project more weight, because you realize that our time on the earth is limited, our lives, our existence is fragile, and in a lot of ways being able to tell these stories is important, not just for today but for the future. Like really important to be able to document a lot of this stuff. So that's a little bit of a preface. The other thing that I will say is that going out and interviewing these people was my favorite part. A lot of these people I knew of and I knew had an influential role, but I didn't know them personally. So I spent a lot of time with Flip Pallett and his wife Diane. I knew Flip previously, but I didn't know Flip, and I'm not being presumptuous to say that I know him now, but I know a lot more about Flip, and I really enjoyed my time with him. Just a great guy, very generous. It was amazing to not just be able to go and film these people, but to be welcomed into their homes and share a meal with them afterwards. So Flip, Heather Templeton, it was great to meet her, and actually not just spend time with her, but also spend time with Lily Renzetti, who I had only known in a professional capacity. I didn't really have any conversations with Andy Renzetti other than business over the years. So to hear his personal stories, and you really feel like you get to know somebody in these interviews. And so that was really special. Sam Tallarico, who's located in Pennsylvania, not as involved in the fly fishing space anymore, but was a huge figure in fly fishing photography for many years. I mean, he was one of the preeminent fly fishing photographers, and just to get to spend time with him and to share a meal with him and a little bit of wine and really get to know these people was just a magical part. And spending time with Ed Jaworowski on that level was just really an amazing experience.
So many of the people you interviewed for the film, the only reason I know them is that Lefty talked about them so much, telling stories about Sam Tallarico or Sarah Gardner. I'd never fished with her, but, Lefty would tell stories about her, talk about them. He was always talking about other people. So you almost feel like you know them, but then, like you say, you got to go to their house and get to know them firsthand, not just through the Lefty connection, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and we Sam Tallarico and I talked about this quite a bit, actually. I feel like the spirit of Lefty is still very much alive, and that connecting spirit, because even several years after his death, he's still bringing people together. again, the thing that I really valued most about these interviews was not that it was like, rush in, set up a set, and and then just wham bam, thank you, and you're out. In many of these cases, like I said, we shared meals together and wine and just telling story after story about Lefty, and it's just like, it just, like I said, that was a super positive, invigorating part of the whole project. And I'll tell you, I was really pleased to spend Johnny Morris is in the film, and extremely busy man, but I was extremely impressed by him. Such a nice, genuine guy. Felt like he was 100% present, as such a busy person, but really enjoyed that whole experience. Really enjoyed getting to know a little bit about his background. I mean, what strikes me about Johnny Morris and Lefty is that very similar backgrounds. I mean, Johnny Morris grew up very poor. His father also fought in the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh.
And so I can see that didn't really make it into the film, but I can really see why Lefty was sort of an important figure for Johnny Morris, very much almost like a kind of like a surrogate dad figure, because in many ways Lefty, having fought in the Battle of the Bulge was just, I can see him being very similar to Johnny Morris's father, and it's an interesting parallel with Flip as well. Flip's dad, a successful guy, banker, whatever, but didn't have a lot of time to spend in the woods with Flip growing up, and Flip really latched on to Lefty as sort of a father figure, I think. And I know you have, I certainly have felt that way about Lefty. Not so much with the fishing stuff, but just like the life advice stuff. I mean, I really feel like...
I've told many people that he was like a grandpa to me. I had... my grandpa passed away 20 years ago, but then sort of like Lefty became my new grandpa.
Yeah.
The way you idolize, and I don't know, he always kept up with me, and he'd send little handwritten notes on his, from the desk of Lefty Kreh, and leave voicemails saying, I read the new issue. You did a good job. Just wanted to let you know, goodbye. I mean, that's the kind of thoughtful guy he was. That he would do stuff like that. Like, nobody does that anymore. And even at that time, nobody did that, but Lefty did it.
Yeah, and that's another one of his, superpowers. Honestly, it's something that most people seem to, and I don't want to diminish his, fishing ability, but for me, that goes without saying. I mean, but what most people remember about Lefty are those things he made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. He wrote letters to you. As busy as he was, he called and followed up. I know, Barry Beck was saying, he always knew somehow, he kept track of how Kathy and my, this is Barry talking, Kathy and my travel schedule. He somehow knew when we were coming back from a trip, when that would be, and he would call and he'd want to know, hey, how was the trip? And you think about how we operate now, and we're so busy, and you have to work with so many authors. It's you can't keep up with all that stuff. But somehow Lefty was able to just make you feel like he, was keeping up, and that is a superpower.
He did it all, and he didn't have an Outlook calendar.
Right.
How did he manage all that?
Yeah,
it's pretty incredible.
It's amazing. But yeah, those letters, everybody I talk to just remembers those, remembers the letters, and really that was something very, very special. And not just the act of letter writing, which was unique, but if by extension, just thinking about somebody as busy and as important as Lefty, slowing down and taking the time for you, that was really special.
Yeah. One of the things I loved about the movie is a lot of people get fixated on Lefty's casting or his fly tying or all the reels in his basement or the way he modified everything. He was very peculiar and outstanding in a lot of different ways, but you really did a great job of focusing on his personality and his intellectual and emotional contributions to not just fly fishing, but like all of humanity, like who he was as a person. And that's what a lot of people didn't know. They read his books on fly tying and stuff, but they don't know who he was as a person. And I think you really got at that message. Like that's when you finish the film, you really know who he was as a person. And in that process, you also get to know the people that you interviewed too. I feel like I know all those people much, much better. I really enjoyed Johnny Morris's comments in the movie. Like, what a thoughtful man! Like what he said about conservation and about memories. It's not about catching. He said something like, "It's not about catching trophies. It's about trophy memories." And getting all those memories, and that helped me identify with him a lot more. He's like, he's into fly fishing for the same reason I am. He's just like me.
and that's how he feels about hunting too. It's you got to think like he has children, and just and he before the interview he was showing me pictures of his kids or like pictures of his brother-in-law, and like he has kids, and like when you have kids, that some days you can go out and you can catch fish, and some days you're not going to catch fish. But like that time that you have with them, that's like really important time. And he went into some of that didn't make it into the film. But yeah, I mean that quote about it's not about trophies, it's trophy memories. A lot of times, like for us, that might seem like cliche, but for somebody who can do whatever they want. Yes. Anytime they want with whomever they want, to really embody that is makes him very much aligned with the spirit of Lefty, I think, because that's kind of how Lefty felt too. It's just and so getting back to that, yeah, I mean I don't think everybody knows about Lefty's like mailbox where he had it rigged up with the ball that would drop so that he would know when the mailman had been by, or like how he reversed the straps on his like hip waders, or how he like literally engraves his name into every piece of like fishing tackle that he has, or his basement. But I feel like, to me, like those are all super interesting insights into Lefty's particular brand of OCD.
My favorite was he bought that, was it a 4Runner? He had like a brand new truck. I think it was a black 4Runner, and I mean, it was a brand new truck, and he glued a piece of foam on the armrest so it was 2 inches higher.
Heck yeah!
Like, who would?
Yeah, I
was like, wow, that is amazing.
Yeah, or
so Lefty.
Put a big ball on his antenna so that he could find the vehicle in the parking lot. But everything, yeah. And so there's that, and that's a really endearing, quirky quality of his. And then there's some other stuff too. That I just have felt like people have talked about a lot. So I didn't want to necessarily like go there, but like his routine daily 15-minute nap is something that, he would fall asleep anywhere. He just needed that like power nap.
Power nap is what he always called it. Even at a show, like at ICAST or whatever, you just like zonk.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many pictures of him like sleeping over like a steam grate, or sleeping on like the bow of a boat, or sleeping in an airport somewhere. I mean, and then the other thing about Lefty, his his culinary preferences and how bland he wanted everything and how well done. Like if Lefty got a steak or a hamburger, it'd have to be. But I felt like all that stuff. If we had. If it was going to be like a 3-hour show or something, and all those things are super endearing. But for me, after thinking about what Lefty's legacy is at this particular time in fly fishing, I feel like the character was the most important thing to emphasize. I feel like we're at a interesting point, and not just, I guess, our sport, just with social media, with all sorts of things going on. It is just, I feel like, character issues sort of are, it's just really, really important. And I think we all have something to aspire to, in terms of character
Yeah.
and how we act.
Tom Brokaw said Lefty was from the greatest generation. Tom's in the movie, but that was one of the takeaways from the film, is that we need a message from the greatest generation now more than ever. Really, at this point in society, like, we need this right now, not just fly fishing. Our whole society needs this right now. That was a powerful message to me. And from the sport of fly fishing, this is not a film about catching a fish and holding it up and having music playing. I mean, this is one of the most substantive piece of historical fly fishing film that I've ever seen. I mean, this is a monumental effort that needed to be documented for generations to come. And just one of the things, just working with you going through this, like trying to get archival material to put in it is so challenging. That's because of changing media and stuff, the history's just getting lost. It's just going away because it wasn't digitized and stuff. People's memories of him are not getting taken down and stuff, but you accomplished it. It's like a monumental effort that needed to be done. So thank you.
Well, thank you, because it wouldn't have happened without you and your efforts. Media is a whole thing. But yes, when you realize that for 20 to 30 years of his career, like much of it was undocumented. He just did it, right? And there's photos here and there, but very little footage. But even with like quote unquote modern media, like 70s and 80s, everything has changed so fast that even a lot of that stuff, it's too cost prohibitive to archive in the right way, that even the stuff that was recorded in the 60s and the 70s is kind of disappearing. Or, the IGFA, for instance, they have a ton of like archival video footage, not just of, I'm not sure about Lefty, but just in general. But the act of like digitizing it, because a lot of the old machines and players that used to even be able to play this stuff aren't available. So a lot of that stuff disappears. Or is disappearing. And I think that, and not to get on any sort of like high horse or anything, but I think that the people coming into our sport don't have access to like a lot of like that history, or aren't really interested in deep diving into the books. So it's just not. It's not front and center for them, necessarily. And I do think that that we're in danger of having, some of the essence and the mojo, kind of. Fly fishing is not all about a 10-minute music video of, hero shots. There's a lot to be learned from somebody like Lefty. Or as Blaine has made the point, Blaine Chocolate has made the point, not just Lefty, but a lot of the disciples and people that were in Lefty's orbit, they too seem to have a lot of the same like values, but that could disappear, It could disappear.
Well, I'm hoping that with a film like this, it will give these new people to the sport, or people who have been around for 40 years, will give them a new incentive to go back into the books and the libraries and find out why he was so important. But still, if you go back and read his fly tying books and casting books and stuff like that, you can see how important he was to the sport of fly fishing. But it doesn't really tell about his character. This finally talks about his character and gets the message across of the kind of person that he was. And another reason I think it's so important, not just from the historical perspective of, there was never a memorial service or a wake or any kind of gathering where Lefty's friends could pay respects or talk to each other and share stories and laugh about how funny he was or all the great things he was. There was never that that moment that we could all get together and share. And Lefty didn't want a memorial service, so it didn't happen. I feel like that this film premiere where we all get together, it's going to be March 27th in Lefty's hometown of Frederick, Maryland. I feel like this is going to be a big get together that's kind of a substitute for a memorial service. Yes, it's many years later, but this is our chance to all get together and celebrate his life. I think it's an important, I don't know if I call it closure, but a celebration of who he was and what he was.
Yeah, I agree. And again, not to, the character is super important, and his spirit, right? Like, it's just his spirit, like his energy. I always felt like after spending time with Lefty, I always felt better for that time that I spent with him. I always felt somehow like my soul was rejuvenated a little bit, or I was somewhat improved. I mean, he was a little bit like a drug. And I, through the course of my time with Lefty, there was a period when I was going through some hard times. And, just to spend time with him literally made me feel better and gave me something to aspire to. And that's a powerful thing. I mean, that's a rare thing for somebody to be able to just emanate that type of energy, and a lot of people feel the same way. But getting back to some other things about Lefty, that his character, yes, but there's some things that like young, it's not just all about the history either. It's like when you look at Lefty, he was like, his mentor was Joe Brooks, and one of the reasons that he thought so highly of Joe Brooks was that Joe Brooks was like traveling all over the world doing like a lot of firsts and doing like some really cool stuff, and wasn't just a trout fisherman. But Lefty eclipsed Joe Brooks within 10 years, like in terms of his expansive knowledge, right? And his fly fishing prowess. There's actually that clip of, you could see Joe Brooks fly fishing in the Lefty movie. That's Joe Brooks and the archival Florida footage.
It is?
Yeah.
What?
That's fishing.
I didn't even realize that. His back was to the camera.
Yeah. But Lefty eclipsed like his mentor within 10 years. And I think what a lot of like fly fishers could really take away from Lefty even today is one, his ability to fish for like multiple species, and to like, he enjoyed trout fishing as much as he enjoyed smallmouth fishing, bone fishing. He was such not just a intellectually curious people, but like a fly fishing curious person. Like he fished for all different types of species. And I think, and Blaine talks about it a little bit, but like that really does make you a better angler. I mean, you just to fish for one species, you only have like a very myopic view of things. And Lefty really, in my opinion, did that better than anybody else. I mean, he might not have been an expert in any one thing, but he knew more about all these different destinations around the world and all these different fish species, both conventional and fly fishing. I mean, he was an amazing conventional angler. And I think that's really important, especially in this day and age, as sort of our resources shift around a lot. Like, trout streams can come and go, unfortunately, depending on environmental conditions, whatever. But there's something to be learned for Lefty's sort of voraciousness for all different species, whether it's carp fishing, smallmouth bass, trout, stripers. I think that's a really valuable lesson. And the other thing I don't think that a lot of people know about Lefty is how seriously he took his job as a journalist. Like, he was first and foremost, he never thought of himself as a fly fishing expert. Like, that's not, like, he was for his entire career a journalist. And when you go back and you look at his notes and how meticulous he was preparing for a story, he would have folders and folders of background information and super detailed notes. If he took a trip with Frontiers, for instance, he would come back and write the Fitzgeralds like a 5-page letter, like detailing everything like that. I mean, and to me, that's like unheard of. I mean, Lefty was meticulous in his craft. And I think his craft was journalism. And I don't think a lot of people know that about Lefty. I think a lot of people want to just be like, oh, he's this like world traveling angler and a teacher. But he was a real student of the craft of writing and journalism. And he wasn't he wasn't a great writer in terms of like purple prose and flowery language and everything. But he really did pride himself in being straightforward, honest, and also well researched. And I think that's kind of a lesson that we can, take away from him, is just this sort of like integrity and this notion of trying to be as truthful as possible. A lot of times online, it's real easy for people to be like instant experts and stuff with very little experience. Here was a guy that would not only go out and get the experience, but would be so careful about putting something out there until he ran it by, a bunch of people. He got his quotes, he went to the sources. And I just think that there's a lesson there for, for people, and not just journalists, but now we're all sort of publishers. So I think that like even in the online world, I think there's a lesson there for people, is to try to be as truthful and as authentic as possible.
Yeah, he worked hard at it. I mean, he wasn't just doing magazine articles and books and doing trips for Frontiers, but he had a weekly column for the newspaper with the Baltimore Sun, right?
The last job he had, was with the Baltimore Sun.
So he had a lot going on at all times, and he used that network well to check facts and keep information coming in, going out.
Yeah, it's just something that, I don't know, nobody ever really talks about it, but to me that was what was one of the most impressive things, was just how meticulous he was and how serious he took his role as a traveling journalist. And also, there's a couple lines in the movie that reflect that, but he never thought of himself as an expert. He just had a really good bullshit meter. So he could like weed out who knows, he knew enough to have a good BS meter and know when can see the red flags. But he was the person who would come back and assimilate all the stuff. But he never thought of himself as like an expert. And I feel like that's just something that's, so important these days when we have so many experts out there, and here's a guy who like always wanted to give credit where credit was due.
The ultimate outdoor journalist, and that's who both of us learned from him. Like the first month on the job here in Pennsylvania, we drove down to Lefty's house, and he gave us a slideshow on how to take good outdoor photography and how to take notes and who I should be talking to. And like, he was more than a grandpa figure. He was a role model in terms of, what you're putting out there in the fly fishing world and how it had to be accurate and represent the sport with integrity. It was huge role model in my life. Yep. And yours too.
Yeah. I mean, you had a journalist background.
Yep.
So you learned a lot of those skills, ahead of time. But I do think that idea of knowing your sources and going to the right people. I mean, for me, that was so huge because, as an editor later on, I can craft somebody's sentence, but I can't give them sort of like street cred or their authenticity, like that's what they bring to the table, the knowledge. But we can work with their sentences and stuff, but you got to be able to work with the right person.
And he was very good before his time at avoiding the hook and bullet shtick that a lot of people fall into,
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there were some, if you go back and read some of his articles, a little bit of the me and Joe stuff, but only as a way to get into a story really quickly. I mean, he did focus like right on the meat and potatoes. And some people might say, the writing is a little too dry, or like I said, it didn't have enough adjectives or big words in it. But for me, it's actually, looking back at it, it's like perfect. I just, it's almost nostalgic to look back at sort of, how simple and straightforward a lot of his stuff was. It's just news you can use, very practical.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should tell people where they can see the film. We mentioned the premiere March 27th. It's also going to be on Outdoor Channel and World Fishing Network in the month of April. You can check their websites to find out all the airings. It's going to be on those cable TV networks, and then it's going to be on all our FAST channels, which are like Plex and Samsung TV and all those channels that come preloaded in your television. And eventually, by the end of 2025, it'll be out on our free channels, like on YouTube and stuff on Fly Fisherman Magazine.
Where do people go to just get like a one-page resource for like where to find it? I mean, is there a
good point? We don't have that yet, but it'll be on flyfisherman.com. Yeah, we'll do a banner on flyfisherman.com to like list all the places they can view it. There's also going to be private screenings in fly shops in the month of May. Lily Renzetti is organizing a thing called Lefty Day, where a bunch of shops will screen it at their fly shops. So that's going to be cool. I believe the date's May 17th, but that'll be listed on our website on flyfisherman.com also. And how do people get a hold of you if they want to follow up with Jay Nichols?
Don't Google me.
Don't go to his Instagram because he never posts to it.
No, but don't Google, because there's I think some English porn star or something that has the name, Jay Nichols, and there's a Jay Nicholas out there who's also an author in the fly fishing business, but that's not me. Instagram is good. I think it's JT Nichols 2020 on Instagram is good. I do check those messages, and I am on like Facebook, so they can just Google and just make sure to mention.
And you can also meet Jay March 27th at the film premiere. He'll be there, and hopefully we'll get you to get up and give a few opening remarks before the film.
Yeah, come on down. It sounds like there's a lot of space in the theater. It's a big place, huh?
It is a big place. I think you can have 1,300 people in there, but like all the VIP tickets for assigned seating, that's all sold out, and all of the cocktail party tickets are all sold out. So you can still come and see the film.
I'm excited. Frederick's a great town. It is historically important. Lefty literally would have walked, by that theater, would have hunted and fished within a mile of that whole area. If they come on down early, especially with daylight savings time, you can walk around Color Lake, and they have that whole greenway down there, and you can see the statue of Lefty, and it really is special. And it's a great town for eating and drinking.
And this theater is where he met his wife.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's it's going to be a magical evening for sure, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thanks for making it happen.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Ross.